definitively one kind of person or one type of person or another. In the broader, bigger sphere of communications, which is where I'm kind of professionally most positioned. The work at the highest level is about something that I don't want to do. I mean, the work at the highest level is about something that I don't want to do. The sphere of communications for my own ends, to actually express things that I wish to express, and was very fortunate in the early years to get that opportunity. But of course, at the higher level, at the highly remunerated level of communications for banks, insurance companies, governments, airlines, etc., 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 luxury corporations, it's not actually about what you think, it's about what message the business requires to give to its audience. Yeah. So the obvious cliched payoff place for me to end up as a communications consultant, art director at this time in my life, that obvious payoff place is not somewhere that I'm interested to go.
Yeah.
The platform of free speech that we, in a way, most associate, let's say, with art now, is a place I can go, but where I'm not exactly recognized as an artist. Why? I'm allowed there, they let me go there, I'm welcome there, and I'm respected there, but my brand is not artist. So it's fabulously interesting to be multifaceted, but in a climate of infinitesimally specific brands, it's not the easiest or the most rewarding place to be.
I can imagine. A lot of what you just said there kind of ties to something I wanted to ask later, but it's pertinent, which is about record sleeves, which I'm sure you're very tired of talking about. But I was thinking a lot when I was researching about that idea of communication, and about sort of the very nature of graphic design tends to be that you have to have something to communicate.
Yes.
Whereas actually a record sleeve, you don't necessarily.
Somebody does.
Somebody does, but in a sense, you know, when someone goes to buy a record, they already know they want it. They perhaps already know the
absolutely.
band.
They don't need to be told to buy it at all.
Exactly.
No,
so it's this kind of weird space that exists somewhere between art and somewhere between, like, you can't make a poster about nothing, which you can make a record sleeve about.
Exactly.
Nothing.
Even Emily King, who is actually the editor of the first book, the first Peter Sell monograph, I expressed to Emily one day the notion of being an independent communications designer.
Yeah.
And she said, "How do you mean?" I said, well, you know, if you take, let's say, even a furniture designer or a potter, they can be independent. You know, they can make a chair or a pot, or a fashion designer can make a garment that they want to make. Whether any patron or client or company asks for it, they can do it. You know, the very essence of, let's say, couture collection is someone expressing themselves to a non-specific brief. But exactly as you say with communication. The graphic designer's role in the sphere of communications is to deliver a given message, and it's not their message, it's someone else's message. If it's their own message, then they're no longer actually being a graphic designer, communications designer, they're being an author or an image maker or a political activist. They're actually expressing their own opinion. And conventionally, the sphere of communications design is not about expressing your own opinion. It is helping else deliver their message. That's why you get paid money for it. The phenomenon of the record cover is it's neatly encapsulated, painfully but neatly encapsulated by something that Tony Wilson would always maintain, that pop was the art of the playground. Now, it used to upset at the age of between the age of 25 and 30, when Tony would remind me that pop was the art of the playground, it kind of upset me because I was trying to get away from the playground as a young adult, and it seemed to intellectually, in a way, devalue the culture of pop, to think of it, to frame it in that way. Some years later now, I can look much more sort of favorably on that point of view, in that by being the art of the playground, in this post-war period of whatever that is now, 60, 70 years, pop has been the generic given culture to all young people in the Western world, given and shared universally by them. So ever since my teens in, gosh, when was that, the 60s, I have been sharing in a common culture of pop with all the other people of my own age, and then with younger people. And that, of course, that has become just increasingly prevalent over, you know, the 50 years from the 60s until now. So there's this common grounding, a kind of foundation course in shared popular culture that we all have to some degree or another, and particularly in the UK, because the UK is this tiny test case, kind of project space of pop. Pop culture is intense in this country. We have a very large number of people in a relatively very small space, all sharing, all on the same time zone for most of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, sharing like one or two TV channels and one or two radio channels, a really shared experience. And also in the first language of pop, which is English. The disadvantage to all non-English speaking young people, the disadvantage of the last 50, 60 years, has been the slight obfuscation, the difficulty to understand at core what pop is about if you don't fully get the language. You know, if you think that Talking Heads are a dance band, you're missing something about what's going on with Talking Heads. And you know, there are plenty of people, there's plenty of French people who think that. And you know, one has to be understanding and have some sympathy about that. So English is the first language of pop. It is the language of pop predominantly. And in the UK, we have like a place the size of a very small American state with 55 million people in it. So we have this crucible of pop culture. You know, if something is happening in a playground in Manchester today, then Glasgow and London know about it by the end of the day. Even when I was growing up about it, they knew it in days. Now, I mean, now it's instantaneous. So therefore you have this shared experience, and it's actually that has had bearing on what happened to me, in that my work reached through through the sort of marginal channels of pop culture. It reached a very wide range of people unexpectedly, who were still all in their formative teens. And then they went on to become doctors, accountants, bus drivers, artists, photographers, fashion designers, architects, entrepreneurs, business people, homeless people, I mean, across the board, teachers, educators. I made a certain impression, or the work that I was able to do through the autonomy of factory allowed me to make this impression upon people, which has had some bearing on their own standards, values, and how they see the world. So the consequence of that is actually this strange multilateral place where I operate now, where I'm, you know, still the consultant creative director of a city, of Manchester, which is kind of governmental kind of position to be in. I'm doing that. I had some work in the Venice Biennale last week. I have a commission from the Tate to create some imagery about the evolution of Tate Modern. I have some fashion clients. I have a textile company in Denmark who I'm consultant to. I've just done a record cover. I'm involved in this cross section of things that shouldn't really happen. But when I turn up at a meeting now, quite often the marketing director or the CEO is a Joy Division fan. And this is quite odd, they're younger than me.
Yeah.
And in many cases they're a fan of some sort, of something that I was involved in 25, 30 years ago. And it's because of the art of the playground. It's because my work made some connection with people before they decided who they were or what their career was going to be, before they even knew what they were interested in. We all have this mutual engagement with pop.
Do you think it made that impact because when you were creating it, not to put you down, but you were kind of in a similar place where you were working out what you were about and you were kind of in that kind of culture?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean,
because you said before that those works, they're kind of about nothing, so because of that they're kind of about you.
They are definitely about me. The special thing for me to remind myself always is that specifically Factory Records gave everybody involved an opportunity of autonomy. Okay, because Factory formed as a kind of cooperative venture that was not founded in any kind of financial model. In this kind of immediate post-punk moment of the late 70s. Everybody involved got to do the thing that they wanted to do the way they imagined you could do it. So it's kind of, in a way, adolescent entrepreneurship, adolescent artistic expression. So the boys who were in groups could be in a group the way a young person thinks being in a group is. There was no contract, there was no advance, there was no business, there was no money, no one gave them any money. So therefore there was no obligation to do anything. So they just were in a group the way a teenager thinks you're in a group. You rehearse a bit and hang around a bit and write a few things and then maybe get a gig and play a bit and people throw things at you and that's it. The price of that is that they had to keep their day jobs. Nobody gave them £1 million and said, okay, you now reinvent yourself, but you're on top of the box next Tuesday. I mean, there was freedom. And the price of that freedom was no advance, no promotion, no advertising. And people who managed groups were able to manage, Rob Gretton managed Joy Division in an entirely ideological way. Because there was no debt. He had not just been given £500,000, which he had to make good within 12 months. There was no debt, so therefore there was no responsibility. And the same applied to me. I was able to utilize the medium of graphics freely, without any obligation to anyone, other than the groups. Now, normally in the practice of doing record covers, there is an obligation to the group. So, I've never, ever, ever had a brief from a record company. I've occasionally had a brief from a manager that was insightful. A fabulous woman called Gail Coulson took me to one side after Peter Gabriel had created the album So. And she said, Peter, you have to bring him out for this. And she said, when you hear it, you'll know why I said that. And when I heard So, knew exactly what Gail meant. Peter had, without a doubt, created a great body of work, a great body of songs, from Sledgehammer to Don't Give Up, that transcended any core audience that Peter Gabriel had at that time.
Yeah.
Those songs were for everybody. And I realized what Gail meant, that there had to be a face, there had to be a personality for this wider range of people to be able to relate to. And that was probably about as close to a brief as I've ever had for a record cover. But obviously individual musicians and the kind of archetypal head of a group, and there's always a kind of there's a sort of a political structure in a group. There's a hierarchy, and whenever you meet a group, you kind of know before you meet them who is the hierarchical head.
Yeah.
The art director, sleeve designer, whatever, is working for that person. It's their album, and so it's their cover. And your job is to help facilitate that. So in many cases, that's what I've done.
But did you really feel that when you were working on the... Yeah.
In the case of the kind of post-punk moment of Factory, initially with Joy Division, everything was in a proto-state. There was no hierarchy that had formed within Joy Division. And always with groups in their early months, there's no hierarchy. Having a van can make you much more important than being able to play an instrument. So there was a kind of definitely a kind of egalitarian mood within Joy Division in 1978, 79. Nobody presumed to be dominant over the others. There was a feeling of extreme detachment and cool. So they had an image that they had found that they would like to have on their first album cover, and that was the pulsar graph from the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Astronomy, the unknown pleasures image, which was, unquestionably a great enigmatic image for an album cover. They'd found that most groups know what they want on their first album cover or their first single because they've been thinking about it for years, or for months or years, and they know the title, they know everything. It's after that they don't really have time. So Joy Division had the waveform, but all other questions were kind of moot. So would anyone like to put the title with the image? No, it's a bit obvious, isn't it? Yeah, okay. We all agree that's a bit obvious. Would anyone like to put the name of the group on the cover or on the front? No, it's not very cool, is it? No, it's not very cool. Would anyone like to write any credits, really, or say what they did? That's not very cool either, is it? So when we did Unknown Places, there was this almost a straitjacket of cool.
Yeah.
It's a total reticence. So I came away, and that was the brief. So I came away with the wavy diagram of CP 1919, the first pulsar I've ever recorded. And really, the complete freedom or no obligation to do anything else. To put a title, to put the name of the group, anything. And I couldn't quite figure out how to do it. So I could have put the title on, I could have put Joy Division on the front. But in the same way that it was their first album, it was my first album cover. And I couldn't figure out how to do it because I didn't know very much either. And it was good that it was in black and white because I didn't know how to do anything in colour. I couldn't have done colour artwork at that time. I had no idea how to do colour artwork. I had no idea how to specify it for print. So I put the whole thing together on a glorified version of a photocopy machine, a studio camera, a graphic studio camera, the so-called PMT machine. And I did the maximum the maximum nothing that I could do. And they didn't want any information, so I didn't really put any information. And it worked. It created this strangely enigmatic object, and exactly as you said at the beginning, when people want a record, they want a record. It really, the famous brown paper bag, it really doesn't matter. Occasionally you will buy a record that you didn't know you wanted because of the cover.
Yeah, do you think that was kind of the case with Blue Monday?
Occasionally people will buy a record.
Yeah.
And that has in since the late 80s and 90s, that has become a thing. People say to me sometimes, I bought the record.
Was that not the case with Blue Monday?
No. But the key point is, you've never not bought a record you wanted because of the cover. So sometimes, there's something that we want, and we're elated to say, wow, it looks great as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're disappointed and think, oh, crikey, I don't really, but it doesn't stop you buying it. So therefore the record cover has no function.
Yeah.
Other than to protect the record. It has no function. So in that sense, it is packaging. Not unlike an art medium. It actually has no specific function. And if you have no requirement of conveying information either, then you have a relatively free-form pseudo art object for young people.
Is that why do you think people adore your covers so much? Because going back to what you yourself said about your practice and the way you like to operate, it seems like you like operating in that way the most. So not that it's your best work, but because
I perhaps should have been a fashion designer. I perhaps should have had one artist. I perhaps should have been in a discipline that afforded me my own initiative.
Yeah, because there's an amazing quote which you gave in a past interview, which I love, where you said, "I'm really not that interested in doing graphic design. It's the context and the meaning of the work that appeals to me." And the person interviewing you said, "Where has this led you to?" And you said, "Unemployable."
Yes, well, but yeah, I mean, people do refer to me as unemployable. If somebody comes to you, or you kind of go to them, if there is a cause, and that might be, a humanitarian issue, it might be a handbag. If there is a cause, if there's a thing, a product, a service, a commodity, an experience, if there's something that you appreciate, value, and like, and have some enthusiasm for, then being involved with that in some way is always kind of compelling to us. We are kind of magnetically drawn to things that we think are kind of cool or good. So whether it's, Chanel or Médecins Sans Frontières, they're great things, And yes, I would pick up the phone if Chanel called, and yes, I would pick up the phone if Médecins Sans Frontières called.
But it doesn't seem
because they're extraordinary. Now, so if as a communicator, somebody who knows a little bit about how to frame a message or frame an entity, if you're asked to help with that, to help something that you kind of feel something for, then that's brilliant. But the formal career of the communications designer is to deliver the messages that you are asked to deliver. Now, this is what kills most young people who go into communications design. They go to work in a studio, and it's a job, and they have to do the job. So they find themselves, being asked to do sandwich wrappers for boots. They're asked themselves being found to find a way to put some extra info on a Sky Broadband, web page or something. And it's just, they find themselves just ground down by the awful banality of 99% of communications work. I mean, our entire globe is a communications sphere, and most of it is either awful in its intent, or just aesthetically awful. I mean, there's a few things that look beautiful, but actually when we say, what is this for? We go, oh no, not that. And there's a lot of stuff which just still looks terrible. And I mean, this pained me enormously as a young person. That I would look out at the world we were in, and I knew how things could be done, and I saw how they were done. And this actually I found really, really painful and really upsetting. By the time I was at art college, I knew that I probably didn't want to go to the real world of the job. But I wanted to be involved somehow in visual culture and in a way in art. But art didn't exist in my world, in the kind of an actual world that I knew. It didn't exist at all. And certainly not contemporary art. Growing up in an industrial, about to become post-industrial city in the north of England in the 60s and early 70s. Contemporary art was something that definitely was going on somewhere in the world, perhaps in New York, and kind of appeared occasionally in my life in a book or the Sunday magazines, which had just kind of started then in the 60s. But there was no art reality in the world that I knew. So the idea of going to art college to do art was, to me, in a kind of middle class business family value way, to me was unimaginable.
I want to just nab that idea that you just said about art as reality, because it's something we talked about before we went live, which I think is something you've kind of, between, as you say, being a graphic designer or being an artist or wherever you are on that strange kind of career spectrum. It seems like something that does engage you is the notion of putting art into people's lives, regardless of whether they're a collector. Tell me more about that.
Well, that's kind of what happened. That's what that's what the autonomy of factory gave me the opportunity to do.
But did you only do that at factory?
I did it certainly I did it initially and most purely at factory. In that, once I was at art college, I discovered a thing which I would now refer to as the canon. Okay, so I went in on a kind of ticket of design, of kind of graphics. I liked fashion a lot. I was enormously interested in fashion.